You're listening to 89.1 FM. This is the WNYU podcast, Bare Your Soul. Every week, we ask someone to do just that. Put it all out there. We hear vulnerable stories from all walks of life, from all sorts of strangers. I'm your host, Julian Collet. You won't be hearing much from me today, and that's because our guest, Mateo Gluck, my cousin, said it all. This piece is heartfelt and wrenching, so please stay with us. It's his story, his stage. Here he is.
Well, my name's Mateo Gluck. I'm 23 years old, from Denver, Colorado originally, but moved out to New York about like a month and a half ago almost, for a job with the New York Yankees. So, my older brother, my only brother, but Keenan Gluck, he's 26 and has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And essentially what that means is, your muscles get weaker and weaker the older that, you get. So, very rare genetic mutation in which, one out of every several 100,000 people get this disease, and only affects like males. Luckily now there's been a lot of steroids and things that have come out, and obviously there's no cure, but they have ways in which they can stop the muscle deterioration from being as rapid as it was in the past. And so it's still an incredibly, gut-wrenching, awful, and tricky disease in which, for Keenan, he was able to walk at one point. He used to walk and would, even up until the point of, into high school, he was using a little scooter. He'd walk short distances. And then I think it was, his sophomore year of high school went into the electric wheelchair. Full time. So it's obviously he's fully there, and is a college student right now at Metro State, and has a good group of friends, and is a big sports fan and theater lover, and so has a lot of outlets and hobbies and things that he enjoys to do, but obviously is affected every single day by his MD. So
you can do you have any ideas of what?
Yeah, I want to talk about the scariest moment I ever, the most fucking fearful I ever was when we were driving with my dad. This is like in the summer. This is in the time where we were doing summer at Stanley. We were working, at Hogwarts camp. So a bunch of coworkers that we would work with at the summer camp, and so we would occasionally go and go to trivia on Wednesday nights, get a couple of drinks for the people that were of age, get some food, and hang out with each other, whatever. There was an instance in where Keenan had an issue with his power wheelchair, and I don't know if it was just something was broken on it, or battery issue, or something of whatever happened. His electric wheelchair was inaccessible for the evening. So he was just going in the manual wheelchair. So for Keenan, we have this this car, a Honda. It's like a Honda Odyssey. It's a van, your most typical mom van, in which the middle seats have been taken out. So there's a ramp, an electric ramp that operates for him to, come into the car with his electric wheelchair, get out of the car. There's a couple clips in which he gets latched into, so the chair's not moving around, and then just a seat belt that connects from the top to the bottom. We had brought in Keenan in the manual wheelchair, so there's an issue with the power wheelchair this evening. Don't remember what it was. It's not that important. Whatever. I was wheeling around. Obviously, I was with him, and so I could, just kind of take care of him. And it's not like we were going super far. We're getting dropped off at this little pub, having the trivia, and then getting picked up. And so didn't really think anything of it. We get dropped off. We have a good night. Nothing happens. We are on the way out, and so it's my dad who comes and picks us up. Probably my mom cares a little more back in the day, especially. Like, she'd be like, make sure he's clipped in. That, like, this is not to be joked with. This is just like a seatbelt for us, seatbelt for him. And my dad would be kind of more of the I didn't clip him in on this specific drive, which I usually did, but I was holding him myself. No seatbelt, no clamps, just me holding him by the handles in the back. And it's this specific wheelchair doesn't really have like that good of safety. Really, it's really just like a back rest. There's not even like a full handle for me that I was grabbing onto. And so I felt, as though I'd be able to, kind of gauge whether or not we're stopping fast, or would need to tilt him back or whatever. I'd be able to take care of him because I was holding on to him as opposed to the clips. So we're driving home. It's this one intersection on Colfax, which is like, if you've been to Denver, Dad's going about like 45 miles an hour. Huge intersection. And so yellow comes, and we're pretty close. I think if you ask him and, you're like, hey, would you make that decision again? He'd say, 99 times I do it, I'm going through that yellow light and everything's prevented. Nothing happens. It's one of the 100 things that, we take for granted on every single, daily basis, is that, like having the ability just to walk, to be able to get out of bed, go to the bathroom, whenever you want. My dad's going pretty fast, flashes yellow. He slams on the brakes pretty hard, and Keenan falls face first onto the seat, like onto the floor, out of his wheelchair. And his right leg has gone under the front right passenger, the shotgun seat, and it's literally like bent like a pretzel. Like, my heart like actually sank to my stomach, and I was like and I jumped up so fast. The adrenaline was like it was like his knee is like off to the right, and I pull it out of there, and like I set it back, and I was like, oh my God. I actually thought like his leg was about to be like severed. Like, I pulling someone's broken knee and almost like setting it back kind of into place, in which you kind of feel at fault because you were the one holding him, and this person's at the mercy of you as the the handler or the caregiver in that moment. Keenan like screamed like right when it happened, but honestly not even that like decently loud, but like for how messed up it was like I would have been howling way worse. My dad, like, how he is, he was like, stop screaming. He's like, it's not that bad. Like, what are you, like, you're overreacting. Like, he's like, I'm sorry. Like, don't worry, but like, it's not that bad. Like, what are you like yelling about? Something along those lines. I had literally just pulled his right leg out, and it was like actually like bent. Like, it was so disgusting. And like my dad was like, I don't know, just like mad at himself, or I don't know. He gets like angry in situations like that. And then Keenan like I don't know how, but he like it was like when you're holding your breath, didn't say like a peep. My dad gets out of the car after he parked, and then he just let it loose. He was like, ah, like this scream from hell. And I was like, yeah, like that's what I would be doing too. But then, yeah, I think when my dad got into the back and saw, how bad it was, he understood and felt bad that he had gotten, was yelling at him before. And so immediately drove us to the hospital, to Children's Hospital, in which Keenan, and we wouldn't know this yet, would have these 3 back-to-back-to-back leg and knee injuries, in which caused it's an FES, but it's a fat embolism syndrome. And so rather than just dealing with the broken bone, He, 2 of those times, went into the ICU. 3 summers in a row this happened to him, in which he fell out of both his electric or the manual chair, and then subsequently had, I think that the shortest stint he had in the hospital was like 4 or 5 days, and the longest one was like almost like a month. And I remember the first time this happened especially, it was super, super scary because we didn't really know what was going on and why. We had known, I think he broke his, it was a bad break, he broke his femur, but it was he was experiencing kind of shutdowns, and it wasn't at full strength in terms of organs and stuff that wouldn't be affected by a break of the leg. Yeah, it was scary. It's something that is just very tricky to witness and watch, and you just feel for someone that you love very much and care for. And so it feels like there's almost nothing you can do in the situation, and I hope that there's a cure, and I know there's been a lot of money and research that have been dumped into trying to find a cure for Duchenne, but it's really awful and just kind of painful disease that just continues to chew away at your muscles and deteriorate your strength and mobility. And I asked Keenan in the last couple months, I think maybe this summer when I got home from school, I said, hey, what do you think is becoming more challenging for you? He said, I think it's getting even trickier for me to use my arms as well. And so if you, something even as simple as you go into to give to dap Keenan up, and you stick out your hand, and my friends who come over, they kind of forget from time to time, and they'll they stick it out, but he kind of just sticks his hand out, he keeps it on his lap, because he doesn't he still eats dinner and uses his hands for meals, and washes his hands and uses his phone, and is a college student, and so he's typing all day, and it's not like he can't use his hands, but I think he just doesn't have as much, especially with his arms and his movement. It's not like he's able to raise his hand over his head. You never know what people are dealing with, and how their disease or illness or whatever they might be kind of unfortunately gifted or stuck with in life is going to affect them. But you can find amazing people that you love and care for in all realms of life. So to me, it was obviously a couple physical features, for kids with MD, they, for instance, their calves are much bigger than your normal typical everyday kid. So I remember a lot of times when we'd go out, and if Keenan was wearing shorts, he'd get a lot of looks from people of being he looks like a bodybuilder, and we'd be no, that's actually, part of the MD. But sometimes my mom, I think, would get pissed off with people for the tone or the way in which they said things to him, but not very often. And I think, for me, I honestly would get more mad, the older I got. But I think that didn't happen for me until a later age, in which I would I kind of was able to stick up for myself more, or had just the almost older brother mentality in that sense, with Keenan, even though he's obviously the older brother. I feel at some points in some avenues I kind of assume that role, or just am just forced with being the one who has to look out for him. And not that that's a bad thing, and I love it, and I think has made me more responsible to a degree in that light. I do feel like the more protective and obviously one who's able to kind of stick up for him. And now he's in an electric wheelchair, so people, I think, luckily have become more aware with that, and I think for the most part do a good job of being wary of where he's at, and he's wheelchair coming through, moving their chairs and being cognizant of him needing that space. But I think as for like where we need to go, I think there's still like a disconnect between a lot of like disabled people and able-bodied people in terms of like, I just think there's still kind of like just like an unwritten rule, or like, I don't know, just like a stigma, I guess, for hanging out with like someone who like who has a disability. I think is viewed a lot of the time as like, what are you doing hanging out with that person? They have a disability, like you're weird for hanging out with them, or like, and I think unfortunately, I wish it wasn't that way, but I think is that way. And might have just been the high school we were at, but I think is true for a lot of kids that are coming from a place of not understanding, or just having that maybe reservation to even approach someone who's disabled, or I don't know what that stems from, maybe not wanting to be disrespectful or rude. But I think a lot of the times people who have disabilities, they get kind of overlooked, or like people aren't always as aware of how awesome and kind of cool and funny these people just like us, they're no different than you and me. And I think for some people, they unfortunately like overlook that, or just don't ever reach out or have a conversation with someone who is disabled, and then kind of flip that switch in their brain and be like, oh, like like exactly like for Keenan, like most people that do meet him are like, oh yeah, I love Keenan, like he's the boy, like he's a good friend, he's passionate about so and so, and I think people just are reserved and hesitant to make the first move. And I think in a lot of aspects of our life that's true, but miss out on having that connection or that opportunity if they don't even say hello. So
thank you, Mateo.
Yeah, of course, no worries.
That was episode 3 of Bare Your Soul. I'm your host, Julian Collet. I hope you enjoyed. If you're listening out there, if you're tuned in to 89.1, I want you to do something for me right now. Text me. Get your phone out, and I'll give you the number. I need to learn from what people make of me and my guests and our truths, so please, all strangers welcome. The number is 310-951-3234. That's 310-951-3234. I'm serious. Do something you normally wouldn't and text a stranger. You won't regret it. 310-951-3234. Thanks.